But we begin tonight with special counsel Robert Hur's report about President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. Having had a day to digest the nearly 400-page report, I can comfortably say that this is one of the most nonsensical, absurd, and outrageous documents I have seen since then FBI Director James Comey's hit job on Hillary Clinton and her email server 11 days before Election Day in 2016. In both cases, the conclusion of the prosecutors was the same. No charges were deemed warranted and no crimes committed. But that didn't stop either Comey or Hur from ladling on superfluous political and personal attacks on what was supposed to be a simple, fact-based report answering just one question. Is the Justice Department going to indict? That's it. That's all the public wanted or needed to know. Instead, Hur begins what can only be described as a political diatribe designed for Fox News like a script for the Five on the very first page, appearing to call out Biden as an egotist by writing, quote, Mr. Biden has long seen himself as a historic figure. Well, yeah, man, he probably does see himself as an historic figure. Joe Biden is a president of the United States. There have only been 46 people in all of America's 248-year history who've served in that role. And not for nothing, he was the vice president to the first black president in U.S. history. So that kind of makes him an historic figure, don't you think, Mr. Hur? And then on page six, Hur claims that a reason that he wouldn't bring charges against the president, for whom he found no crime, was that Biden is an elderly man with a poor memory, going as far as to say his memory was so poor that Biden couldn't even remember when his son Beau died, despite the untimely death of Beau Biden from cancer being a thing Joe Biden talks about literally all the time. Last night, Biden did not hold back in his response.
I was very honored as a man. Viktor Orban. Did anyone ever hear of him? He's the leader of, right? He's the leader of Turkey. By the way, they never report the crowd on January 6th. You know, Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people, soldiers, National Guard, so whatever they want. They turned it down. They don't want to talk about that. Just think of it.
You saw that guy? Biden did respond, and we're going to play that in a moment. But, you know, we're just going to go with what we got on the screen. Because it was news to me, to be honest with you, as I read this report, that being old and having a poor memory was an excuse for not being prosecuted. And you just heard that guy. Somebody should update all the defense lawyers out there, including the ones working for him. Now I think we're going to play Biden. No? Okay, that's okay. Trump, who cannot tell the difference between Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley, and who often thinks that he ran for president against Barack Obama, and who statistically is just as old as Joe Biden, has been indicted on 91 criminal counts. Nobody said that he should be off the hook because of his age or his mental infirmity. And the same could be said for Rudy Giuliani, who's being prosecuted in Georgia. How do you explain both of them being prosecuted? Both men are elderly, and clearly their memories are shot. It's simple. Because whether to prosecute someone or not is not about age or infirmity or whether they can remember things or not. It's about facts and evidence. Why did it take so many pages just to say you're not going to prosecute Joe Biden? And why all the personal attacks? Let's just remember, Mike Pence was investigated recently for the exact same reason, and it led to the exact same result, no prosecution. But I don't remember any personal or political vitriol from prosecutors aimed at Mike Pence as they cleared him. And while special counsel Hur felt it necessary to include that very partisan-sounding fodder, it was Attorney General Merrick Garland's final decision to allow the Hur report to release entirely unedited. NBC News has learned that Garland felt that he was not in a position to withhold or edit any information for fear of being compared with Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr and how he handled the Mueller report by quoting selectively from it and dishonestly from it before it was available for the public to read for themselves. But Barr did that to cover up the fact that Trump did indeed do what he was being investigated for. I mean, Russia did try to help him become president. In Biden's case, editing the memo wouldn't have reversed the conclusion. It would have preserved the dignity of the Department of Justice by not allowing it to look like a department at Fox. In fact, it appears that in trying to look nonpartisan, Garland overcorrected, according to former Obama Attorney General Eric Holder, who says the report contains way too many gratuitous remarks and is flatly inconsistent with long-standing DOJ traditions. Had this report been subject to a normal DOJ review, these remarks would undoubtedly have been excised. Hur, a longtime Republican who clerked for Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist and other right-wing judges, left conservatives with something that they could use when the facts didn't play out in their favor. In other words, Hur did exactly what Bill Barr did, and Merrick Garland let him. And then there's the contrast. In Biden's case, he didn't attempt to withhold classified documents from their rightful owner, namely the federal government. With Trump, it's the opposite. And it's not just that Trump took classified documents, which he did, or that he refused to turn them over to the government, which he wouldn't. He also directed his staff to hide those documents and then to destroy the evidence of those acts. Add to that, he lied to his own lawyers about the documents, putting them in legal jeopardy for then lying to the government. And while Trump was rightfully indicted for his actions, there's still a question of whether he may be able to wriggle out of any accountability, given that the Trump-appointed judge assigned to the case, Aileen Cannon, has been slow-walking bringing the case to trial. Yesterday, Judge Cannon was called out by special counsel Jack Smith for making a, quote, clear error in the case that could reveal the identities of potential witnesses and expose them to threats from Trump supporters. Joining me now is David Plouffe, former Obama campaign manager and White House senior advisor, Mary McCord, former acting assistant attorney general for national security and co-host of the Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast, and Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. And Jill, I'm going to go right to you because you have the experience of writing a report about potential criminal actions by an American president. How did it strike you when you read the Hur report? Did it strike you as odd?
It struck me as a violation of everything the Department of Justice stands for. It was against every policy. Attorney General called it traditions, but I would say it's much more than traditions. The way that Hur went out of his way to put in a knife and twist it was worse than Comey Redux. It was really terrible. All of the things that you quoted so very eloquently, I would say you have a new job as a prosecutor, presenting the evidence to a jury from how you did that. It was just really unnecessary, obscene, and to say he's a historic figure. He's the president of the United States when you're talking to him. Of course, he's a historic person. And all that that report should have said is we did not find evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, and so there will be no indictment. And the other thing that I thought was really terrible was the explanation that, well, we need to talk about his poor memory because he wouldn't come across to a jury as someone that should be punished for that. He's not a witness. He's the defendant. All you need is evidence that will come in through prosecution witnesses. And there is no excuse for commenting on what you think his mental capacity is, except if you're going for a job in Trump administration #2. And so it was wrong on every level.
And, you know, Mary McCord, that's how it struck me, too. Look, I'm not a lawyer, but by now I have read a lot of indictments because Donald Trump just keeps on getting indicted because he keeps criming, right? I read nothing in the Jack Smith indictments of Donald Trump, and there have been 4 of them, that commented on Donald Trump's appearance, the way he speaks, the way he talks, the things he says, right? There's a part in this document where it says Joe Biden took contemporaneous notes of his meetings with President Obama. And then it says some of those notes contain classified information. Then it says, well, he shared his notes with his ghostwriter. And then it says, you know, we don't have any evidence that he shared the classified parts with his ghostwriter, and none of the classified material appeared in the book. So I'm like, well, why did you tell me thing 1 if thing 3 is going to be none of that matters? It literally felt gratuitous. But I have to say, I couldn't get past page 1 because starting off by saying, this guy thinks he's historic. I was like, well, yeah, he's the president. Your thoughts?
So I think that there are parts of this, and I have not read the full 300 plus, nearly 400 page document. I've read the executive summary and selected parts. And part of this read to me like what we would normally see in, or not normally, but what would be included in a prosecution memo that is purely an internal Department of Justice document that is created when a prosecutor has finished an investigation and it's either recommending, yes, we're going to go seek an indictment, or we're going to decline to seek an indictment. And in that memo, you would set out the evidence that could be used to support the elements of the crime, but then you would set out all of the evidence that doesn't support the elements of crime, all of the vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the case, and you might even point out things like the defendant could appear sympathetic, which would also mean I'm going to have a more difficult time proving my case at trial. But the thing about a prosecution memo, it's not a public document. It's purely to memorialize sort of the investigation decision-making within the Department of Justice. And Robert Hur knew, because he was operating under the special counsel regulations, which provide for there to be a report that the Attorney General will then decide whether will be made public. And Garland I think has long said, I'm going to make this report public. Robert Hur had every reason to believe that this would be made public, and still included a level of detail well beyond anything even that you would see, I think, in a prosecution memo. And certainly knowing it would be made public, knowing we are just, months out, we're in the midst of primaries, months away from a general election. These kind of information is the kind of information that will be directly used in campaigning, will be directly used against Joe Biden in this election, even though the bottom line is no criminal culpability.